All right, so we might as well go ahead and get started. You'll find under the readings and resources each week, you'll find PowerPoint files, and you can access that either through PowerPoint. If you don't have PowerPoint, you can access it through the PDF version. And then also, I'm going to be recording PowerPoint videos for you each week to hopefully, help you to better understand the material. So you can, go through and watch, and, that way, it might better explain some things that perhaps you might not fully understand just from doing the reading. So we're going to start off with chapter one, and chapter one is in most textbooks is going to be a kind of an overview of nutrition in general, and we'll kind of touch on some subjects that we'll get we'll dive further into as we continue on through the course. At the beginning of each chapter, you're going to see learning outcomes, and this just kind of gives you a broad overview of what we're going to be covering. So we'll talk a little bit about what makes you pick what you eat. We'll talk about the 6 different classes of nutrients. We'll talk about the principles of balance, variety, and moderation. We'll talk a little bit about genetics, not getting really deep into it, but we'll talk a little bit about it. And we'll also talk about nutrition information, what to believe, what not to believe. We'll talk about the scientific method and what that entails. As with any science class, it's always good to have a understanding of the scientific method and even to apply to everyday life. So those are the things that we're going to cover during this chapter. So to start off with, if we're talking about nutrition, obviously we're going to spend some time looking at, what kinds of food choices do we make, what do we, eat, and a really big thing in that is, what makes you pick what you pick to eat. So, and we all have different influences that come into play, so why did you eat the cheeseburger you ate yesterday? Why did you have, the apple with lunch? There's different things that will influence your individual choices. So take a moment, think about, anything that you've eaten this week and what might have influenced your choice. If you've already gone through the introduction, discussion forum this week, you'll find that that's something that you need to do. You need to list some of the things that have influenced your food choices throughout the week. So here's some examples. So this chart here is going to kind of give you an idea of, some of the things that might have influenced your food choices this week. Being a college student, perhaps food cost plays a major role for you. So going to the grocery store and you're seeing that, apples are on sale, but strawberries are not. You might choose apples over strawberries. Maybe you got fast food this week because the food cost is relatively low. So that could be a really big thing for us. Education, occupation, and income play a big role here in what we tend to choose to eat. If you have a really busy job, a lot of times you don't have time to stop and cook, and, you grab things on the go. So that can play a major role. We can get into habits. So what you're used to eating, every morning you grab a granola bar and that's just what you do. So you get into these, kind of ruts or these habits that you get into. Your lifestyle plays a role. How busy are you? If you're working out, are you having, a shake after you work out? Health and nutrition, possibly talking about, if you're looking at losing weight, we're talking about after the new year, everyone's got those new year resolutions. So perhaps you're looking at cutting calories, and that influences what you decide to eat. Commercials can play a role, availability can play a role. Many of us, will eat more berries in the springtime when berries are in season and they're cheaper, and they're more available than in the wintertime where they might not look as fresh or quite as nice. Of course, what food tastes like. Our psychological needs sometimes play a role if you're a stress eater. So if you're stressed out and you tend to eat more during those times, that can play a role in your food choices. And of course, our social aspects here. That definitely plays a role. If you're going out to eat with friends, maybe they're choosing the restaurant. It's their turn to pick. So for that reason, you might be eating something you might not otherwise be eating. And of course, how you were raised. That will also play a role in what you decide to eat. There's certain things you grow up eating, and you tend to eat those going forward. So lots of things can influence our individual choices each week. And some of these might apply to you, some of them might not apply to you directly. But you can think about, the kind of crossover and the different things that, might influence your individual food choices. Now, this being a nutrition class, we're going to talk about nutrients, of course, and we'll get into more detail. We spent a whole chapter with carbs and a whole chapter with proteins and so on and so forth. But for right now, doing an introduction, we could say that nutrients give us energy to do all the different things we need to do on a day-to-day basis. It gives us materials, so the building blocks to be able to, build bone and hair and skin and keep our cells healthy. And it also plays a role in regulating our body processes. And again, we're going to get deeper into each one of these things as we continue on with the course. Now we could break down our nutrients into what are known as essential nutrients and non-essential nutrients. So you'll see these terms come up throughout the course. What it means for something to be essential. If you think about the word essential, the definition should really come hand in hand with it. It's essential that we have these in our diet. Our body cannot make these nutrients on their own, so we have to be able to have these in our diet. Those are your essential nutrients. Now, non-essential nutrients, you don't really need to consume them. Our body does need them. So the non-essential doesn't mean that our body doesn't need them. Non-essential means that we just don't need to consume them, since our body can take other nutrients and turn them into these nutrients. So essential needs to be in the diet. Non-essential, we don't need to consume them. They don't need to be in the diet. But both are necessary for our body to be able to function properly, whether giving us energy, structure, or helping with regulating body processes. There's some other things that we'll run into throughout the course, and with your reading you might run into these terms. And these are things that are substances found in the food, and even though we haven't proven any benefits from them, there has been some support and some studies to lead us to believe that these could very well be very beneficial to us. Whenever you see the word phyto, it should refer to plants. So phytochemicals are basically these non-nutrient substances that are found in plants, and the zoochemicals are found in food from animals. And again, these things are not essential nutrients, but there have been studies to support that they are beneficial for us. So here's some examples that we can find here. This just gives you a few different things that you might be able to find. Carotenoids in the bottom left there are found in yellow and orange fruits and vegetables. And that class of chemicals is thought that it can help out being an antioxidant, which is something we'll talk about when we get later in the course. But it's something healthy for us. Others have been linked in with reduced risks of cancer. So when we talk about fruits and veggies being really healthy for us, it's not just the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that you get in there, but it's also some of these other chemicals that have been linked in with reducing risks of cancer and other possible health benefits. So that's when we call these things functional foods. So of course, if you're going to eat broccoli, it's going to be good for you because you've got the vitamins and minerals that are in there that are healthy for you. But on top of that, because it contains a lot of phytochemicals, we refer to broccoli as being a functional food because it's got the possibility of those phytochemicals helping to prevent things like cancer. Oatmeal, having high fiber in it, has been linked with lowering cholesterol. So again, we're going to talk about labeling of foods, so we'll come back to this idea of what a functional food is and how we go about labeling those things. All right, so let's get into, a big part of the class here. And again, we'll introduce things briefly here, and then we'll come back and spend some more time with each one of these in individual chapters. So nutrients in general. We could take that family tree and split them into macro and micro. If you think for a minute what macro means versus what micro means, you might come back and say micro, that's small, and macro, it's big. Well, we split these up because your macronutrients are things you consume in large amounts. So in gram amounts or higher. Micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals, that's what we consume as milligrams and micrograms. So we consume very small amounts of these things. Now, it doesn't mean that macro is more important than micro. Macro just means that we consume large volumes of these. Micro just means that we consume smaller amounts of these, but they are all essential nutrients. So our carbs, our proteins, and our lipids, as well as water, we consume those in large amounts. And our micronutrients are what we consume in relatively small amounts. So we'll take a look at each one of these different classes of nutrients. So we could break these down and look at some different examples. Your lipids and fats, whenever you hear about any type of fat, it's going to fall into that category, as well as cholesterol. Your carbs, you hear about those in different terminology. So if you hear the term starch or sugar or fiber, all of those refer to carbohydrates. We'll get into individual vitamins and minerals, but these are classes of nutrients overall. So your 6 classes are the carbs, proteins, the lipids, water, vitamins, and minerals. 6 classes of nutrients. Now, when you think about your different carbohydrates, and again, we're going to spend a whole chapter dedicated just to carbohydrates. We could do a lot of things with that. We could break down our carbs into, complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates. Your complex tend to be your pastas and your grains, whereas your simple carbohydrates are more of your sweet foods, your sugars. So we find carbohydrates in lots of different things. So of course we find them in grains and pastas and all that kind of thing, but we can also find, carbohydrates in fruit and in candy and in junk food. So carbs are found in a lot of different areas. Your fats are going to also come from a lot of different places. So you can have things like avocado that is high in fat. You can have, you've got fat in milk and in cream. You've got plant oils like olive oil and canola and vegetable oil. You've got animal fats such as found in bacon or, in a steak. So lots of different forms of fat, and we'll spend time in the fat chapter talking about the types of fats, healthy fats versus unhealthy fats, and some of those sources. And then of course our protein. So we talk about protein being, one of our classes of nutrients. Again, there are going to be individual foods that we could put into that category. Most of the time when people think about high protein foods, the first thing that comes to mind is going to be meat. Meat, chicken, fish. But we have a lot of other high protein foods, a lot of plant sources, and seeds and nuts and beans tend to be really good sources of protein as well. Again, we're going to get more into that once we get into future chapters. Okay, so again, with this being chapter 1, we're introducing a lot of concepts that are going to carry on throughout the rest of the course. Definitely a definition that you should be familiar with is the calorie. And it may seem strange, but there is a difference between calorie with a capital C and calorie with a lowercase c. When we talk about dietary calories, we're talking about calorie with a capital C, also known as your kilocalorie. And sometimes that's abbreviated as KCAL, kcals. And what that equals is 1,000 of these little calories. Now, a calorie with a lowercase c is a very, very small unit of energy. It's the amount of heat necessary to heat up 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. So don't worry about that aspect of it. Just know that when we're talking about dietary calories, we're talking about the larger portion. We're talking about calorie with a capital C, also known as your kcal or kilocalories. And what that measures is it measures the energy in the food. So when we consume calories, that's giving our body energy. Energy to take a walk, energy to keep our heart beating, energy to do whatever it is that we need to be able to do. Now, our different classes of nutrients are going to have different amounts of energy. Now, proteins and carbohydrates, these are less energy dense. So these have only 4 calories for every gram. So for every gram of protein, you get 4 calories. Fat is very energy dense. So for every gram of fat that you consume, you're consuming 9 calories. And again, the uppercase, lowercase here, from this point on in the class, when I'm talking about calories, I'm always going to be talking about dietary calories with the capital C, even though it's not capitalized here. So just keep that in mind, that calories from this point forward is all about dietary calories. Alcohol, even though it's not a class of nutrient, it is still something that gives us energy. We can survive without alcohol. It's not necessary for our body's functioning, but it does give us energy. So we can't discount that when we're looking at how many calories we consume on a day-to-day basis. You have to include everything you eat and everything you drink. So 7 calories per gram. So we could take in all of these different energy sources, regardless of where they come from. Those energy sources are going to allow us to do all the things that our body needs to do. Make new compounds, be able to have our muscles move, growth, development, repair, balance within our body, keeping your heart beating, being able to breathe. All of those things require energy. Our body requires energy on a day-to-day basis, so we have to consume these things in order to give us that energy. Now, another thing that we're able to do is we can do some calculations, some real simple calculations here, to be able to tell us how many calories something has in it if we know the grams of carbs, the grams of protein, and the grams of fat that are found in something. So if we have a food that happens to have 10 grams of carbs, 5 grams of protein, and 10 grams of fat, we know for every gram of carbs we have 4 calories. So we would say 10 times 4, giving us 40 calories from the carbohydrates. We would take that 5. We know that for every gram of protein that we have 4 calories. So we would take the 5 times the 4, giving us a total of 20 calories from protein. So we have 40 and 20. So that gives us 60 calories so far. And then we have to add into that the grams of fat. For every gram of fat, we know it gives us 9 calories. So just from fat, we're getting 90 calories from this food. So we're adding those together, the 40 plus the 20, that's 60, plus the 90. We would calculate that this food has 150 calories based on its composition. Some more definitions here for you. Nutrient density, and this is really just telling us how many nutrients something has per calorie. And a lot of times with this, we're focusing in on the idea of vitamins and minerals. So the high nutrient dense foods tend to have lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, and they tend to be lower calorie foods. So your fruits and vegetables, your whole grains, you pack in lots and lots of that good stuff in there without taking up a lot of your daily calories. Your low nutrient dense foods, these are things that have fewer vitamins and minerals, and tend to be higher in calories. A lot of times we think about our low nutrient dense foods as being more of our junk foods. Your cake, your cookies, your pop, French fries, any fried food. And that's one way that we can classify foods as high nutrient dense or low nutrient dense. An example that is found in your textbook is comparing milk with sweetened iced tea. Now, sweetened iced tea could also be, you could put pop there also. When we look at the calories are pretty close to one another. But when we look at the sweetened iced tea, it doesn't contain a lot of vitamins or minerals. So we're not seeing the calcium or the vitamin D or the vitamin A there. But we see those things with milk, relatively high amounts. So comparing these two foods, the low-fat milk is more nutrient dense than the sweetened iced tea because it contains more of those vitamins and minerals for the same amount of calories. We can make decisions every day that, whether we want to consume things with lower nutrient density or higher nutrient density. The best choice is, of course, going with those high nutrient density, really packing in those vitamins and minerals and still consuming, perhaps fewer calories. So here's just a few examples of things that you could swap out. And really, when you look at, trying to cut back on your calories or cut back on your fat intake, these would be switches you might make anyway. Instead of a pie, having an apple. It doesn't taste quite as good, but you could definitely see the benefit there, cutting those calories down. It's only about a quarter of the calories, but we're seeing a lot of vitamins and minerals in those apples. Now, another term that we can find is what's known as energy density. And what that is, it's the comparison of calories to the portion size of food. So anything that's high energy dense, these are foods that tend to contain a high amount of calories and might not be all that large of a portion of food. So high energy dense foods can definitely be your junk foods. So this could be your fried foods, your cake, your candy, your pop. Lots of calories, because remember, calories are energy. Lots of calories, even in small portions. But we can also find high energy dense foods and things that we consider healthy. So if we think about, almonds, for example, almonds are relatively high in fat, high in calories, but they also give you a lot of really good nutrients, vitamins and minerals and good protein and all of those things. So high energy dense, while it can be junk food, we also have some really healthy foods that fall into that energy dense category. Low energy dense tend to be our low calorie foods. Your fruits, your vegetables fall into that group. So you can eat, a whole bowl full of lettuce, and it's not going to give you lots and lots of calories. It's very low calorie. Continuing on with our definitions, you're going to see this term come up throughout the course as well, fortified foods. And what that means is that we've added nutrients to everyday foods. So companies do this. Sometimes they'll voluntarily add nutrients. So calcium fortified orange juice, for instance. Calcium's not normally found in orange juice, but companies will put that in there. And some people will buy the calcium fortified orange juice to, maybe they don't like milk and, you want to get that calcium in there. Other things are required. With salt, we could see iodized salt. We'll spend some time talking about sodium and iodine when we get into the vitamin and mineral chapter. We'll talk about some different types of foods that will incorporate these things, but we add iodine into our salt to allow people to get that into their diet. It tends to be something that a lot of people don't get enough of, but by adding it to salt, people get plenty of salt and therefore now get plenty of iodine in their diet as well. We can also find, of course, the fortified foods that are optional by companies, so they're not required to do it. And we could find, your designer foods that are the voluntarily added things. So, your vitamin waters, your orange juice with the calcium. So they're still fortified. They're adding things in. But now they are done voluntarily instead of being required. Okay, continuing on with our definitions, we have malnutrition. When you hear the word mal, that base word means bad. So while most people think immediately about malnutrition being not getting enough food, it can also be overnutrition. We'll spend more time with both of these as we get into future chapters. With overnutrition, we'll spend time talking about obesity and the dangers of obesity in the fat and lipid chapter. We'll also talk about different toxicities if you get way too many vitamins or minerals and some of the toxic effects those can have on your body. With undernutrition, we'll spend a lot of time with that when we get into, we'll talk about it with proteins and some of the dangers there. And then we'll also, with vitamins and minerals, talk about different deficiency diseases that we can link in with not getting enough vitamins and minerals. So at this point, just know that overnutrition and undernutrition are both considered malnutrition because they're both considered bad nutrition. They're not balanced. They're not the proper amounts that we need in order to stay healthy. So what we can see here, and this really goes with all different kinds of nutrients. So whether we're talking about fat, or we're talking about protein, or we're talking about particular vitamin or mineral, we have this nice desirable area in the middle that gives us enough for our day-to-day needs and a little bit extra for storage in case we need a little bit more that particular time. And there's a range in what's considered to be, desirable or adequate. If you get too much, you can cause problems. And if you don't get enough of something, that can cause problems. And we'll see this continue on through our discussions of different types of nutrients. In this chapter, they also get into genetics. And again, we're not going to get real deep into genetics here. All of you are probably familiar with the basics of genetics, the fact that, this is the stuff that you inherit from your parents. You pass your genes on to the next generation. So, just like if your parents have brown hair, your likelihood of having brown hair is also really high. Or height, we can look into that. So we could look into all different kinds of characteristics. We can also look into different diseases. We could look at things like high blood pressure and high cholesterol levels and obesity, and the genetic effect that those things can have. So some of the basics here that we get into genetics, we have to, of course, talk about DNA. And DNA is something that is found in all of our body cells. Almost all of our body. We won't get into that. Almost all of your body cells. And in that cell, we have 46 strands of DNA. And each DNA strand can form this tight little package called a chromosome. And that's where our genes are. Now, all of your genes are instructions on how to make a particular protein. So our genes tell us, of course, when we talk about, things that can get passed on to generation and things that get carried on. Of course, there's proteins that give us our pigment for our eye color, pigment for our skin color, growth hormones and things like that for, growth and tall or short, hair color. All of those things are considered genes. But it also gives us our day-to-day instructions. How does our body make insulin to help control blood sugar level? That gene for how you make insulin is something that's also found within our DNA. So altogether, we've got a lot of genes, 20,000 to 30,000 genes. And that gives us all of our information to, for what we look like, but also gives us a lot of information for our day-to-day functioning and ability to stay healthy. If we look at the inheritance sides of genetics, in our body cells, we have 46 chromosomes, and it's actually 23 paired sets of chromosomes. So we have 23 different types of chromosomes, 2 of number 1, 2 of number 2, 2 of number 3. And the reason we have those pairs is that we got one from our mother and one from our father. So 23 and 23 from both of our parents. So that during fertilization, we brought all of those chromosomes together And you are a composition of your mother's genes and your father's genes. And your children are, a combination of your genes and someone else's genes. So we could see those characteristics that can pass on from generation to generation. Now, something that we could see in there is that some diseases can be carried on from generation to generation. Some will happen with mutation, where something doesn't go right, so it might not even be something is directly related to your parents. So some diseases we could see through mutation, and some diseases we can see carried on from your parents. And a lot of times what we're seeing with our nutritional diseases is we're seeing that it's a combination of genes and the environment. It's a little bit of both. So we'll take a look at what that actually means. We'll find this with a lot of our genetic factors. So your genes are what you inherit from your parents, and it might make you more likely to develop a particular disease, but your diet and your lifestyle also play a role there. So if you have a family history of heart disease, you are more likely to get heart disease in your life. And if you're aware of that and you suit your diet and lifestyle to be less likely to get heart disease, you can kind of fight against that genetic component. So, you can exercise and eat healthier, and by doing that, you can kind of, overplay that genetic factor. But it is actually your genes and your diet and lifestyle that will play a role there. So you might be more likely to have something, but depending on your diet and lifestyle will also play a role on whether you get something or not get something. So if we look at this, the two factors that affect your risk of developing a nutrition-related disease such as obesity, if you think about that, that should be your genes. So what is your family history? And when you go to the doctor, they ask you a lot of that. If any of your parents or grandparents suffered from any of these different diseases. And then, of course, your lifestyle, your environment. So if we look at something like, can you still become obese even if both of your parents are thin? If you have no family history of obesity whatsoever, can you still become obese? If you think about that, absolutely. Because if you have your diet and lifestyle, if you have a sedentary lifestyle and you don't exercise and you're eating a lot of very unhealthy foods and lots of calories, of course you can still become obese even if both of your parents are thin. Okay. One of the main principles that we're really going to find throughout this course is the different aspects that will play into a healthy diet. And those aspects are variety, balance, and moderation. So a healthy diet is considered one that is high in fruits and vegetables and whole grains, those very nutrient-dense foods. Have a moderate amount of calories, so basically watching your calories, make sure there's not too many or too few. Moderate amount of sugar and sodium, so just watching your intake on those things and trying to reduce as much as possible your intake of the unhealthy fats, the trans fatty acids, the saturated fats, and the cholesterol. All of these things are things that we're going to talk about as we continue on through the course. When we talk about variety, this should be pretty straightforward. You don't want to eat the same exact thing every single day because it's not going to give you the necessary vitamins and minerals. Even if you're eating healthy foods every single day, if it's the same exact food, you might not have the full range of vitamins and minerals that would be beneficial to you. So eating food from different food groups, So getting into your proteins and more of your carbohydrates and trying the different food groups. And then within each of those food groups, having a variety of food. So instead of, saying, I get, my veggies every day, because you eat broccoli every day, eat broccoli one day, romaine lettuce another day, carrots another day, and you're going to have a lot of variety there. So this gives you lots of nutrients. It gives you different types of phytochemicals, and less toxins in your food. So your chances of developing toxicity because you're eating so many of the same thing all the time, you're really not going to reach those toxic levels of nutrients. Now, balance is another thing. Balancing in a few different ways. Unhealthy choices with healthy choices. So you don't have to have the perfect diet that is healthy all the time. Of course, you're going to, have those days where you make unhealthy choices. But as long as you balance that out and also make some healthy choices, that can lead to a very healthy diet. Balancing the foods within your food groups. So not eating, just carbs all the time, but having some carbs and some dairy food and some high protein food. So balancing those things out. And then, of course, balancing your calories consumed, so how much energy you take in, with how much energy you burn on a daily basis. So if you're consuming 2,500 calories every day, you should also be using up 2,500 calories every day. And we'll talk about those different sources of burning calories, because most of our calories don't come from exercise. Majority of your calories burned on a daily basis is just keeping your body alive and functioning. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then moderation, of course. So trying different types of foods and having, variety is really important, but trying to also watch your serving sizes. So what this does for you is it balances out your calories, and you're not going to have, too many of one particular nutrient that could potentially build the toxic levels. Again, we'll talk more about that as we continue on in the course. Now, if you're more of a visual learner, there are a lot of pictures and diagrams in your book. And this is really straightforward, a lot about your decisions, for a healthy diet. If you go to a fast food restaurant and have a Big Mac instead of a plain burger, you're going to have 300 extra calories. Well, you've got to look at, where those calories are going, and you need to burn those extra 300 calories to stay within balance. So that might mean that you have to exercise a little bit more. Now in this course, one of the big assignments that's required in the course is a diet analysis paper. And in that diet analysis paper, you're going to look at all the different nutrients that you consume, their benefits, their drawbacks, and you can also look at that as, thinking about how do you apply balance, variety, and moderation in your own diet, and maybe what are some things that you might be able to improve in your diet to fit better into those categories. So just something to start thinking about as we move forward in the course, is thinking about how these things apply to your diet. Now, when we talk about all of our knowledge that we have from nutrition, we have to look at the different recommendations that are out there. So why is it, that some people are recommended to have 2,000 calorie diet? Why is it recommended we have this particular amount of protein in our diet? When we do those things, when there's, recommendations like that, it's based on research. So there are studies that are being done. So we want to look at how are these studies being conducted. And we also want to be able to look at things. We look at dietary recommendations. We look at advertisements for different, types of weight loss, recommendations. We want to know what to believe, what not to believe. What are good sources of dietary information? So we'll start off. We'll look a little bit at the scientific method and how some of this research is being conducted. Okay, so when we're talking about nutrition, and any science for that matter, and even day-to-day life, we know that the scientific method is important. The series of steps that all scientists will go through in order to, make conclusions. And we have to go through the scientific method in a logical and in a good way that's going to be able to give us reliable information. We can even apply this in day-to-day life, even though you're probably not, with simple things. You're probably not saying, okay, let's go through the scientific method. So the steps are, of course, making an observation. So we could do something really basic. Your power goes out. You go to get a flashlight, and the flashlight doesn't turn on. There's your observation. Flashlight does not turn on. So the second step here is you want to propose a hypothesis. And now your hypothesis is an educated guess to explain your observation. So if a flashlight doesn't go on, what might be your first guess as to why it might not go on? Probably most of you right now are thinking batteries, because that tends to be the reason. You left the flashlight on, it ran out of batteries, and that tends to be a reason they don't go on. So we would design and conduct an experiment here. Now this doesn't, mean we're going to have, test tubes bubbling over and beakers and Bunsen burners and all these types of things. It could be something as simple as our experiment is take out the old batteries, put in new batteries, and turn on the flashlight. See if it's going to light up. Now you can analyze your results. So when you analyze your results, you're going to say if it turns on after changing the batteries, that it supports our hypothesis. And if it doesn't turn on, we've got to go back to step one and say it still doesn't turn on. So maybe it was something else. Perhaps it was the light bulb that was bad. Now, something that I do want to point out is that when you analyze those results, is that you can either support or reject your hypothesis. I want everyone to be very, very careful with the word prove. You do not prove a hypothesis. You can only support it. So, and the reason why we can't prove it, you might say, well, it's really straightforward. You put in the batteries, of course it turns on, so it has to have been the batteries. There's no other option. Well, there could be another option. Maybe by taking the batteries out and putting the batteries back in. Maybe it wasn't the batteries that were dead. Maybe it was a loose wire. And just by jiggling the flashlight around, that wire went back into place, and that's what allowed the flashlight to turn on. Now, the chances of that are relatively small, but we still have to take that into account. So we supported our hypothesis, but we did not prove it. Now, with the flashlight example, we're not going to continue on with 5, 6, and 7, but in regular experimental design, we would. Peer review means that I'm going to show my work to other scientists and have them evaluate it. Repeating and expanding the experiments. Normally when you do an experiment, you want to do it again. Maybe you learned some lessons and you know a better way to do it now. Maybe you want to, make it bigger. And then if you get lots and lots of experiments based on the same thing and getting a lot of the similar results, a stronger step than hypothesis is a theory. So if you get a lot of information that all supports the same hypothesis, it's possible to develop a theory, but it takes a lot of experimentation to get to that point. So again, with experimental studies, if it helps you visually to look through it this way, you can, go through, ask questions, put it together your hypothesis. Sometimes you'll add in background research, what has already been done, has this experiment already been done, and going through and each step of the experimental design. Again, another example, if it helps you to be able to go through and kind of see how this all works out. Again, here's another example that goes through the steps of the scientific method. And this one is more dietary related. We could see, the different types of diets in this example. Going through observations, hypothesis, your experimentation, your analysis, peer review, repeating, and, of course, making your conclusions. Do you accept or reject your hypothesis? In your textbook, they use this example. So make an observation about college student nutrition habits. So for an example here, there's a lot of bottled water in class. So we can make a hypothesis. College students drink more bottled water than tap water. So what information do you need to go about testing this hypothesis, and how do you think you might gather it? I mean, do we have to, go through mad scientists and do a full experiment here? Or could we simply just make observations in the classroom, or perhaps even survey the students? So there's different ways we can go about gathering that information. And then, of course, based on that information, we can make our conclusions. Another example is found here. Again, look at your textbook. You're going to see lots of different examples that go through this process of the scientific method. We could see an observation here. You could see that there's a higher percentage of people that get colon cancer in the U.S. versus Japan. So we might want to look at the difference between, U.S. and Japan. Perhaps it has something to do with our diet. So we want to say the lower incidence of colon cancer in Japan is due to a difference in the diet. Then you want to go through an experiment. So with something like this, you could simply look at the, diets. We might be able to, take some people and give, half of them rice and half of them not rice over a long period of time, and see if that in particular has a role to play. So we go through all of those steps, and there are different types of experiments that will differ as far as how you go about getting that information. Okay. Now, I might seem like a broken record at this point, but it is important that you recognize your steps of the scientific method. Observations and asking questions are very important in science, very important in day-to-day life. So you can use your senses to observe. You can see something, you can hear something, smell something. You can, read research that's done by other scientists. You can hear something from a friend and say, is that really true? All of that would count as observations and asking questions. Your hypothesis is your explanation for your observation based on what you know already. And then your experiment, again, will allow you to support or reject that hypothesis. Step 3, test your hypothesis. Put together an experiment, perform the tests. Now, this is where we can get into some different, definitions and some different things as far as how do we set up that experiment. One option that we can find is, do we want to perform an in vivo or in vitro experiment? In other words, do we want to use living organisms, or do we want to use no living organisms? Both have, their benefits and their drawbacks. If we do something in vivo, experiment using living organisms, a lot of times it's easier to transfer that information and apply it to humans. However, it can get messy, of course. If you've got to take care of a lot of, mice or something, that can get really difficult. Or a whole bunch of plants, that can get, messy. So if we use an experiment using living organisms, there are some complications. There's also some, problems that you might run into as whether or not it's allowable to use those living organisms or not. The in vitro side of things, a lot of times this allows us to have larger sample sizes because we're doing this in a lab, no living organisms, so you're able to take individual cells perhaps and be able to look at their effects of what we can see on those individual cells outside of the living organism. So a lot of times these can be larger, but also you might not be able to apply it as directly to people, which make it difficult to make those conclusions. We also want to think about your variables. Now, there's different variables. Your experimental variable is the difference between your two groups being tested. So, perhaps we're looking at testing a new drug for headaches. And the difference between our two groups, we're going to give one group the experimental pill, and the other one we're not going to give the experimental pill. So the variable is the pill. because that's the difference between your two groups. So if we look at how many variables is ideal, ideally we want one variable. If you have 0 variables, it means there's no experiment being done. And if you have more than one variable, it's hard to assign any kind of cause and effect. So for example, if we have one group that we're giving this new headache medication, and this other group that we're not giving the headache medication to, and then we take that group that we're giving the headache medication to, and we also put them in a room and play soft music. We dim the lights a little bit so it's less harsh on their eyes. And this group is less likely to have, long-term headaches to begin with. There's difference in the actual experimental subjects. That is going to affect the overall outcome. And then we take our group that is not getting the headache medicine and we expose them to really bright lights and loud noises, and they're, more likely to have long-term headaches. Well, if the first group, their headache goes away, we don't know if it's the medication or the soothing music or the low lights or just the fact that they are less likely to have long-term headaches. So the variables, you want to have one variable so that it's easier to get that cause and effect. And you really want to try to control all other variables between the groups, the same environment, the same background, the same age, all different kinds of things. You want to try to make sure they're, if not exactly the same, at least similar between the groups. So that will give us our experimental group and our control group. Your experimental group is whatever group is receiving the treatment. In this case, this is the group that is getting the headache medicine. Your control group is the one that is not getting the headache medicine. And we have that group there so that we can compare the two to one another. Now, sometimes what we see with our control group is that they receive a sugar pill. So if we're testing a diet pill or medication of some kind, this eliminates one more variable, because one more variable is the fact that one group takes a pill and one group doesn't take a pill. When we have a placebo, it means that both groups are taking a pill, but just one of those happens to be the real thing, and the other group is taking a pill, but it's a sugar pill, so it's not containing any of that medication. Now, the reason we do that is something known as the placebo effect. Sometimes simply the act of taking a pill will make people feel better, even if it has no medication in it. That's that mind over matter, that mind over body kind of thing, where if you are, think you feel better, you might start feeling better. But we want to eliminate that as being one of our variables. We look at double-blind studies. This is a type of study that's really good to do, because this is where nobody knows who has the real thing or who has the placebo. And what a double-blind study does is it helps to minimize any kind of bias. In other words, go back to that headache experiment. We've got the group that's taking the pill, the group that's taking the placebo. Now, if the participant knows that they're getting the real thing, that might affect, they might feel better simply because they know that they've got a medication. Now, if the group that's taking the placebo knows that they're getting a sugar pill, well, they might not feel better because they, know that they're not getting any medication. So participants, you definitely don't want them to know if they're getting the real thing or the placebo. But also, as a researcher, ideally you don't want to know either. So you've got a separate person that has, a folder that has a list, and, patient number, 023 has the real thing and 024 has not the real thing, but you don't know which one it is until after the experiment is done. Because inadvertently, scientists and experimenters, they don't mean to do this kind of thing, but perhaps they might ask leading questions, such as, gosh, you look like you feel a lot better. How much better do you feel? As opposed to, rate your headache pain from 1 to 10. Or they might say, ooh, you don't look like you've improved. How bad is your headache right now? And those simple changes there can affect the outcome of an experiment. So you want to keep everything really consistent. Okay, Continuing on, we can analyze our data and results. So we can either accept the hypothesis, we can't prove it. Remember, you can support but not prove a hypothesis, or you can reject it. And of course, we're not done at this point. You want to repeat your experiment, see if you get similar results again, maybe larger sample size. Maybe you want to look at different dosages of the experimental drug. You want to report your findings, because why do science if we're not going to share our information with other people? And of course, ask more questions, because science is this continual, quest for knowledge. So of course we're going to have more questions. We want to know more. So it's important to repeat to try to get, make sure we have similar results. We want to share our findings, so another scientist doesn't have to do the same exact experiment we just did. They can build off of that. And definitely every experiment should lead you to ask more questions. All right, so let's run through an example, just to kind of test your knowledge and make sure you're comfortable with this. Lots of people believe vitamin C reduces your chances of catching a cold and reduces the duration of cold. So simply because you hear this all the time, you grew up drinking orange juice when you're, not feeling good, you wonder if this is actually supported by experiments. So you want to make a hypothesis. So our hypothesis here could be something like people who take a vitamin C supplement daily will catch fewer colds than those who do not. That's our educated guess based on things that we've been hearing. So let's test our hypothesis. Let's look at our setup. With something like taking vitamin C supplements in a cold, do you think you'd want to do in vivo or in vitro? And really here, in vivo would probably be our easiest way to go. You can even do this with people. Your variable here should be your vitamin C supplement, because that is the difference between your two groups. You're going to give one group a vitamin C supplement and the other one probably a placebo and tell them it's a vitamin C supplement. And then you could think about, what do you want to be controlled between our two groups? So we've got maybe 50 people in one group, 50 people in the other group. We want how many variables? 1. And that's our vitamin C supplement. So we want to try to keep things consistent. Similar ages, similar diets, similar health history between those two groups. Could be similar occupation. You could do this amongst teachers or students exposed to lots of people every day. Someone works in an office environment. So you could try to, keep that consistent between your groups as well. So lots of things that you can control. We've got our experimental group that takes the vitamin C, which means then that our control group is the one that takes the sugar pill. And here is a good example of where we could use a placebo. You can't use it with every single experiment, but here you could use a placebo. You could think about how many people and how long you want to do this experiment for. So, if we just did one person taking a vitamin C supplement and one person not, it doesn't give us a lot of data. That's not enough to really support or do an experiment with. So you might want 50 in each group or 100 in each group. And how long? If we're talking about colds and supplementation, 1 day would be really short. But maybe, 10 years might be too long. We can look at, 1 year. Or we can look at several months. Look at cold and flu season and see what kind of effect that's going to have. So we can then analyze our data and results. So hypothetically, we could say during this amount of time, how many people caught a cold taking a supplement versus those who caught a cold that didn't take the supplement, that had the placebo instead. If we saw a lower incidence of colds with vitamin C supplementation, what does that tell us about our hypothesis? Can we support it, reject it, or prove it? If you picked support it, that's right. So if we see that vitamin C supplementation results in fewer colds in individuals, it supports our hypothesis and what we thought. So supports our hypothesis, but does not prove the hypothesis. And of course, we'll repeat the same experiment, maybe larger sample size. We'll share that information with other people and maybe ask further questions. What happens if instead of a vitamin C pill, we all had more citrus fruits? What if we compared, a small amount of vitamin C with a large amount of vitamin C? So, you might have further questions that could come off of your original experiment. Okay, so what this does is this is going to take us now to different types of studies. I'll apologize in advance. I'm recording this from my home right now, and my dogs just came in from outside. So you might hear some collars jingling and some running around in the background. All right, so different types of studies. Epidemiological, basically this looks at populations. So the incidence of, heart disease, in Alaska Natives, the incidence of gestational diabetes in the African American population. So this looks at different populations and their likelihood of getting certain types of diseases. We can also look at a laboratory study, and this is done a lot of times in vitro or in vivo, but it's done in a lab setting, which the advantage of a lab setting is that it's going to allow us to control a lot more variables. Experimental or clinical, this is going to be, the examples that I was giving, like the headache medicine versus the placebo. So we're using in vivo here, so we're using living organisms here, supplement, and a placebo, or drug and a placebo. And sometimes these are really hard to control because, not everybody is 100% identical. But we kind of have to take those averages and try to control as many variables as possible. There are definitely limitations for nutritional studies. You could study with people, of course, that's great, but it's hard to control a lot of variables. You might survey everybody to try to get everybody to have the same diet, but, people lie. People, exaggerate things, and so you might, try to get everybody eating healthy on both sides, but, you might find individuals that tend to not eat very healthy. So that's going to be a limitation of studies. If we're using laboratory animals, that can be complicated because, of course, you need to be able to apply that to people. So when we say something like vitamin E supplements increase longevity, people live longer, if we do that experiment on laboratory mice, it might not apply to people. So we'd have to take it another step further. We do also want to be able to, when we hear nutritional information, you think about all your different sources of nutrition information. Where do you get it from? Where do you hear it? You've got, of course, your history, your background, what you grew up with. So your parents, of course, are, a source of nutrition information. Your friends, they might tell you about a diet they heard about, or, this fad that they heard about. So you can get it from your friends. You hear things on the news, so they come up with new different types of things. Did you know that eggs are, the best thing ever for you? So all different kinds of sources. You've got school, you've got, the people that surround you, the news, the radio, commercials, all different kinds of things give you nutrition information. And now there's so much information coming out at us, it's hard to know what to trust. Your friends might be telling you one thing, but your parents might be telling you something else, and you're getting conflicting information. So we want to look at some of those red flags, some of the things that will tell us, what is the best way to go as far as trusting this information. In general, can you trust scientific studies? In general, yes. But now that you know more about the experimental method and scientific studies, you want to make sure that those things are done properly and well. Not having lots of variables, for instance, not having really small sample sizes. That will all play a role in whether or not a scientific study is considered to be reliable or not reliable. So a lot of times we might find that advertisements for different products or different types of foods might claim scientific studies that back up their claims, but maybe they didn't publish the study. You have to say, why didn't they share it? Why didn't they publish it? Peer review it? Why did nobody else look at it? Because maybe the study wasn't done properly, and that can cause problems. If it was it published in People magazine, or was it published in, a journal of medicine? So you want to make sure that it's in a reputable place where scientists are going to look and they can evaluate that study. Did they do it in vivo or in vitro? In vivo, we tend to trust a little bit more because it's more applicable to humans. Was their sample size big enough? Perhaps they only used 2 people. One they gave a diet supplement to, and the other one they didn't. And that's not really a lot of information for us. So you want to look and see, do they share things like the sample size? And definitely with studies, was it sponsored by somebody? It's not always a problem if it's sponsored, but you want to look for any conflicts of interest. If a company is paying for the study and paying a lot of money for the study, unfortunately, it can sometimes influence those results. So we want to be really careful and just keep an eye out for those sponsors. So overall, when you get this nutrition information, you want to ask questions. Is there a motivation for the author, promoter, or sponsor? Is there financial motivation there for them? Are they trying to sell something? Does the advertisement use anecdotes or testimonials? So basically, are they having somebody famous on there saying, this worked for me, I lost 20 pounds in 2 days? So we want to be able to ask the question, are they using, those individuals to try to sway our opinion? Are the results too positive? Are you going to cure cancer by taking this supplement? You're going to take it for a week and you're going to cure cancer. Or you're going to take this diet pill and you're going to lose 50 pounds in 1 month. That's some very dramatic positive results. Do they use terminology like a scientific breakthrough that's been kept a secret? Scientists are all about sharing information, so you won't see things being kept a secret. So if a scientist discovers a new breakthrough and something really incredible, they're going to want to share with everybody, and of course want to take credit for the work that they've done. So it's kind of a tricky advertisement scheme to be able to use things like your doctor isn't telling you this, and this is something that's been kept a secret. Is there a disclaimer? Results not typical. This doesn't work for everybody. Did they publish the study? Was there only one study done? And of course, potentially harmful side effects. We've all seen those different commercials for different medications, where the thing that it's supposedly fixing isn't that serious, but of course, your side effects can be hair loss, heart attack, death, coma. You see this huge list of different side effects, and that can really affect as well our overall viewpoint. So when you're getting nutrition information from different sources, think about these different questions and how that might influence that information. Let's take a look at just a couple examples. I'll throw these up there and you can take a look at these and say, okay, what might be a red flag or something that might be a little worrisome here. Things sound too good to be true. Sometimes we see that. Here you're going to take this pill and you're going to burn fat, enhance muscle definition, and that's all you got to do is take a pill. That sounds too good to be true, and dramatic positive results. A lot of times these advertisements will also use complex scientific terms to, make people think, oh, well, it's got to be true. I don't know what that means, but it sounds good, like initiate strength thermogenesis or enhance neoprene production. Might not know what it means, but hey, it sounds really good. So definitely there are some red flags here. 25 pounds in 2 weeks. Dramatic positive results. There's a disclaimer here. You can see results not typical. Clinically proven. Can we prove a hypothesis? Sounds way too good to be true. Rapidly melts away, clinically proven, fast weight loss. And of course, we can see the different news organizations as seen on, doesn't say supported by, but as seen on those different stations. So they're kind of using those as, backup and kind of, saying, oh, hey, look, we're credible. But we don't know what the opinion of those different news organizations are on this product. There are some great old advertisements, so I just couldn't help but put these in here. You can definitely see some really great things. Obesity soap, wouldn't that be easy for us? No dieting, no gymnastics. That's good to know. And all you need to do is use the soap. Too good to be true, definitely falling in there. They're not relying on any scientific studies or claiming any scientific studies here. You could send for a book of testimonials, so they're definitely using, testimonials from people. So again, definitely there were a lot less rules a long time ago, but this definitely is showing you a lot of red flags. This is another of my favorites. This one's a little old as well. And it's the Jif diet. Wouldn't this be great? A peanut butter diet. So definitely if you look at the bottom there, we've got a disclaimer. Results not typical. Your actual weight loss could vary. So that, of course, should tell you something. We have a testimonial there from Mrs. Clark. So we can see there that we're using one person's individual experiment or information there, and it's a weight loss secret revealed, so it sounds great and sounds fancy. But really, what we're looking at here, and definitely this is not supporting a healthy lifestyle. Eating 3 peanut butter sandwiches on white bread with 3 large glasses of whole milk at every meal in order to lose weight. Definitely when we talk about diets, that's not a good diet. It doesn't really support long-term weight loss and, our healthy idea of balance and moderation, and definitely not variety.